Welcome, everybody, to Radical Democracy. I'm Maddie Cheers, and we are here on Strong Island Radio on Facebook.com, but also on the TuneIn app. For those of you that would like to call in with questions or comments, our phone number is 516 945 9099. 516 945 9099. And we hope you do call in if you have questions or comments. My very, very special guest today is Morgan Jamie Dunbar, and she is courageously coming on to tell her story. One of the reasons that I started this program and that we started the Women's Oneness Project was to give women the opportunity to tell their stories, and so that all of us can learn to be more compassionate and listen to each other and to learn from each other. That is truly one of our goals here, and we hope to have many more women come on who are courageous enough to tell us their stories. So I am going to turn it directly over to Morgan right now, and thank you so much, really thank you so much for being here on our show. I'm very excited to have you.
You are very, very welcome, and I thank you for making space for me today and holding space for me to share something that for the last 28 months of my life, I have, for the most part, kept inside myself, and it's a very powerful medicine, my story. Unfortunately, when you hold this kind of a medicine inside yourself, it can be very poisonous, very toxic, and, you know, it's been a long time coming for me to be able to speak out and share this information. And so I'll just start by saying it was in August of 2016 that my partner and I were expecting our very firstborn son, Kali Ra Iman, and we had planned the entire time to have a natural out-of-hospital birth. I myself, when I was born, had almost died when my mother was unnecessarily induced, and so the stress of that situation had me aspirate meconium, and I ended up in the NICU for the first week of my life, alone in an incubator with IVs running everywhere. So I had a very good reason to choose not to want to birth that way. And so I wholeheartedly appreciate women who are apprehensive about that and want something different for themselves. I made that choice to birth out of hospital with my firstborn son, and I went out of my way as a New York resident to contract with New York state licensed out-of-hospital providers. And we are one of the few states in the union that actually requires our out-of-hospital birth providers to be, medically trained and licensed by the state. So we are, in pretty good shape here comparatively. And so I had a wonderful, what I call and often referred to as an obstetric dream team. I had a total of 3 different certified nurse midwives, all, practicing out of hospital, and they had contracted obstetric support in the form of an obstetrician, a natural birth advocate herself. And so I was sure that I was in great hands. Unfortunately, situation occurred where I had a ruptured membrane early into the labor. And at that point, it's really important to take note of when that happens and, keep track of that. Because if it goes past about 18 hours and you haven't given birth, all kinds of different things can happen. And that's what happened to me. So at around 19 hours after my membranes ruptured, I had started to really notice, there was foul-smelling discharge. There was, my body was convulsing with fever, and, these aren't nice things to think about, but this is the part of birth that we don't often look at. We don't often have these honest discussions about the fact that in the room with you while you're birthing is death. It's 2 sides of the same coin. So women, our bodies are like the threshold between these different realms. But nobody really explained that to me. So I just was very naive about the whole situation. And so I gave all of my trust into my birth team, and I wish I had had more information. But what happened was I ended up contracting an infection from the prolonged ruptured membranes, and because I wasn't on continuous fetal heart rate monitoring and my own vitals were not being monitored by my wonderful natural out of hospital birth team, I contracted chorioamnionitis, and at a certain point, without going into too many specifics, I write about this quite a lot on my blog and my Birth and Betrayal initiative. So if you'd like to read in detail, it's all there. But at one point, I just realized intuitively that I needed to get to the hospital, or I was going to pass, and my son too, most definitely. And so I made it clear to my birth team, I need to transfer. And not for the reasons that their medical records show, but because I needed a, quote, emergency cesarean, is the way I was putting it at the time.
Right.
And, after they hummed and hawed about it, they agreed to the transfer. They actually told me while I was in active labor with back-to-back contractions, they told my partner and I to drive ourselves to the hospital. And so we did make it there, thankfully, quite quickly. Unfortunately, when they told us don't go through the emergency room, wait for us to get there, we will admit you, we have admission privileges. And so when I got there, they met me there, this natural birth team. And so upon admission, I had my blood drawn, which is a normal thing to do, right, as you get there. And that blood result came back within probably 20 minutes, and it showed white blood cells 3 times the normal limit, which is active infection. And I should have been put on antibiotics right there. But for the next 12 hours, I laid there in a hospital bed, and I was not provided the necessary medical care that would have saved my son for sure. And I asked shortly after arriving there at the hospital, I said, okay, so I can have my cesarean now, we're here and I'm safe at the hospital. Let's do this. And I was told verbatim, which echoes in my mind forever, by the natural birth obstetrician, there is only one way to birth a baby, and that is to push. And you are going to push. And after, this is about 36 hours into labor and all kinds of complications, I was completely depleted at that point, and I didn't have much in me to fight. I didn't want the alternative, which was to have one of the scary, hospital doctors that we're all told are, our worst enemy. So I decided I needed to just trust in these women that had promised to honor my autonomy. And they had also promised to make sure that my experience would be a mother-centered birth experience. Right. And I deserved that. So I just trusted them. And unfortunately, my son's heartbeat gradually diminished, had a number of what are called prolonged late decelerations in the heart rate. And that's over 12 hours. And so at any point, the decision could have been made to have the surgery, but unfortunately, the obstetrician, the natural birth advocate, women's rights advocate, refused to honor my repeated pleas for intervention, and his heart rate eventually became undetectable through the monitors. And at that point, and again, I'm skipping a lot, but at that point, we went in finally for the cesarean that I had been begging for starting 13 hours before.
Yeah.
And I experienced that unmedicated. I had no anesthesia and no pain medication because, unfortunately, the epidural port had become dislodged. And so when they did put the medication in, it did not get into my system. And so only after my son was actually removed from my body, which itself was a real undertaking because he was a 10-pound baby, and he had been he became lodged in my birth canal. So it wasn't straightforward at all. So a 3-minute procedure actually ended up being about 15 minutes of unmedicated. You can only imagine what that was like. So once they got him out, I went under general anesthesia to be sewn up. I woke up. I said, "Is he okay?" And I got no answer. And there were, 20 some different staff members there in the operating room, and nobody would tell me what happened. So they shortly after that rolled me into the recovery room, and my bed was surrounded by I remember at least at least 6 different people in suits, and so this wasn't like a normal situation. I feel like we're talking about suits and people in ties, and they were there to tell me what had happened. And so it was just a little odd. And basically they told me that my son was born without a heartbeat, that they were able to get it back after 15 minutes.
Oh, my God.
But that by that point, he was severely compromised and had no neurological function and would have, no quality of life moving forward. And so we decided to remove him from life support 4 days later, gave a slight window for improvement, but we were sure that, by what they were telling us, that was not going to be fruitful. It just gave us a little bit of time to spend and kind of welcome him before we said goodbye. And so that's the birth story in a nutshell. The part that has been very difficult for me, it's all been difficult, right? But the most challenging thing for me has been the betrayal of sworn sisterhood. I was sold a dream. I was sold an illusion of this natural birth, totally going to honor you, not going to treat you the way that these big bad doctors do in the hospitals. And I trusted that. And, and 9 times out of 10, or let's say 99 times out of 100, whatever it may be, those situations are going to pan out perfectly fine. But when things go wrong, they go hideously, horribly wrong. And women like myself should not have to endure what I've had to afterwards, which is a lot of silencing, banishment from my community, just being pushed out of every kind of safe space that, where women congregate, online communities. I have a very inconvenient birth story, and people are not holding space for it. And that needs to be addressed because I'm not the only one that this is happening to. And it's just really problematic for a sisterhood to act this way.
Well, and I think that is, in your case, it's beyond tragic. I mean, and I think that this betrayal by the sisterhood, what you said yesterday when we were talking personally about this pseudo sisterhood, I think that this is affecting everything now. It's like we have the one size fits all feminism. And if you're not towing that line, if you're not repeating what you're supposed to repeat, then what's happened to you in the most tragic case that I can think of is what's happening all over with women of faith, especially. I hear this a lot from my Christian friends who are women that, in trying to hold on to their faith, they're being ostracized. They're not welcome in groups. It happened to me when I wanted, just in the whole idea of the Women's Oneness Project, was let's find common ground. There are certain issues that are strictly women's issues that need to go beyond politics. and we're being used. I feel like we're being used, we're being manipulated, and we're being used to get people into power who want power, which of course are the last people you want in power are people who want power. And your case, to me, what happened to you is so tragic, because if anybody needs the sisterhood, it's someone like you. It's somebody who has had the greatest loss anybody can have. To me, I can't even imagine. I don't have children, but I do have nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews. I can't even imagine what that pain is like. And to know that death, that loss was needless, and that if your voice had been heard and truly honored, it would not have happened.
Right.
And I think that's the great betrayal here.
Right. And I think there's a lot of people that when I share my truth, they get very, very upset. I am in Buffalo, New York, and we have a very insular, kind of incestuous birth community. And I just want to take a minute and really just kind of give context to this entire situation and just recognize, like, what has led us to this point where we are seeing this kind of treatment of sisters. And this movement, this natural birth movement, the movement towards out-of-hospital birth, that is a response to absolute, valid concerns
Yes.
of women not being heard in hospitals and all kinds of obstetric abuses and birth trauma. And so that's an absolute important thing for us to hold space for. But I want us to also understand that whenever there's money involved and whenever there stands to be people paid, people are getting paid, this is capitalism.
Right.
There is a possibility where the same is going to seep in. So we are not going to be protected from that unless we're aware of the possibility. And what I'm saying is that, what I experienced is, flagrant negligence and substandard care.
Right.
But when I call it out and tell people what happened, and the response of the quote-unquote sisterhood is to silence me, I have to ask myself, what is it that we are trying to protect here? Are we really trying to protect our sisters and make sure that we have the best possible quality of care provided to all of us? Or are we trying to maintain some illusion because it's a profit maker?
Right.
We don't want to step on toes, and we're actually prioritizing people's businesses and their income, over the damage being done. I mean, I am not the only one who has suffered at the hands of these particular providers in my community. They just settled a case in February with another infant that was, victim of catastrophic birth injury and an eventual death because of these same people. So, we have to ask ourselves, it's important to say, we can see that these particular people might have helped, let's say 1,000 women have these wonderful birth experiences where they felt honored and empowered, and that is wonderful, and I'm so glad. But if there's one of us in there, and I know it's more than one, but let's say there's one that was so egregiously treated that we cannot just paste paint over my experience of being treated this way. If we want the best for our sisters, we have to be willing to be courageous and deal with the problem here, not pretend it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Because what's going on is like really devastating lives.
Yes.
It's outrageous.
And it's so not what women are supposed to be about. It's so not where our power is. Our power is in supporting each other, supporting the community, in leading the way to telling the truth. And I think that was an important thing we also talked about, is that we have to tell the truth. There is no changing anything unless you tell the truth. And there are some very inconvenient truths. But it does seem to me that, especially with this new women's movement, this new feminism, that there is one way to tell the truth, and anything that flies in the face of that can't be heard.
Right.
And that to me is just like you said earlier. It's the same old, same old. We can't be mimicking. We cannot mimic what we see as power, because what we see as power, what's happening when we're looking at the powerful in the world, is not the power we want. What we're seeing is what Dr. David Hawkins would describe as force. We are seeing people being intimidated, manipulated, and scared into following certain people,
Right.
as opposed to being empowered
Yes.
to be who they are. And we are seeing it on every level.
Yes.
So when we as women, who are supposed to be the truth tellers, the balancers, when we're not doing that for each other, that has to be called into question.
Yes.
That absolutely has to be called into question.
Absolutely. And coming off of what you just said, this idea of fear, how fear plays a role. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I share my birth experience, and I'm told, I try to get dismissed real quickly with, those are scare tactics. Or, I was a part of a recent national expose into out-of-hospital birth. And you know what? These are facts. So until somebody shows me that these fact-gathering systems are problematic, I'm going to look at all of these data sets. And I'm talking about, this is a 4-part investigative report. And it shows that, out-of-hospital birth is riskier, and women are still entitled to make that choice for themselves. But, oftentimes they're making that choice because of all of the scaremongering about the hospitals.
Right.
We have valid reason to be concerned about everything that's going on in hospitals, how it's done, how policies are made, all of that. But I don't think the answer to it is just to turn to something that is actually statistically more risky for our ourselves and our children. And so when I share my story and people tell me I'm, scaremongering and I'm trying to prey upon women's fear, my son is not a scare tactic.
Right.
His precious life is so much more. And I'm just asking my sisters to hold space for inconvenient facts. They might be scary, but we are dynamic, amazing individuals that can astound ourselves and everyone around us when we show that we can hold space for everything. The things that are in agreement with our narratives and the things that are an absolute affront to our lived experience. My story is a part of the wholeness, the duality, this beautiful life and death and, happy stories and bad story. It's just, we can hold space for it all. Believe me, sisters, we can.
I believe you.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is that we can. And the only way to make that change, to make that shift, is through the honesty of these things. And we have, all of this honesty that came before has put pressure on hospitals to give more options, to allow women to have babies standing up, or sitting in a chair or in birth tubs. But so that hospitals are seeing that they've had to change.
Yes.
So now it may be, yay, you started this movement, great for you, but you might have to change with it. Is that you cannot risk one person's life. It is not acceptable to risk one woman or risk one baby for some concept that you're afraid will be destroyed. It's the same thing. I brought this up once when another woman brought this up. The reason I'm against the death penalty is not to say, I can't tell you what would happen to me if one of my family members was murdered. I have no idea how I would feel in that moment. I am hoping that I would still remain against the death penalty because we are human and we make mistakes. And in my world, in my worldview, my spiritual view, it is not worth seeing one innocent person put to death. It just isn't. And it is certainly in your situation or any other woman that's been subjected to this, it is certainly not in my worldview that you should be silenced about what this truth is to save this concept
Right.
of what home birth is.
Exactly. Because you know what? I realized I was such a self-righteous person. Like I've written about this, and I think it's so beautiful to be transparent about the transformation through trauma that I've experienced.
Right.
Like I was right up there with the Ina May Gaskins of the world. I thought that women who chose anything apart from a natural vaginal birth, unmedicated, were victims of society. You know, I held no space for anyone's individual circumstances, and it's just it's really sickening to me, how closed-minded I was. But I also hold space for, and I appreciate, how that developed in me. I was, like I said, I almost died from that system. So I appreciate where people are coming from. But yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts of the whole thing is with my second baby, Phoenix, who's laying here just waking up next to me. And we'll have to take him out in a minute if he starts up. But, Phoenix was born in hospital, and I couldn't have I wouldn't have bet any amount of money that I would be having a child in a hospital. I decided to have him an elective cesarean at 39 weeks. Okay, to me, that was like the biggest abomination ever. Like that is just the worst thing a woman could ever do is electively have a child before they naturally started to want to begin labor. Okay, so I had my second born son, Phoenix, 39 weeks, elective cesarean. I had a gentle cesarean. I had my obstetrician. For him was amazing. She took so much time with every single appointment. She went out of her way to honor and hold space for every single sentence of a 3-page birth plan that I presented to her. Okay, and she went out of her way on her own time to go into the hospital where she worked and to find and compile a birth team that would be, sensitive to what I've already experienced.
Right.
I mean, this was, you couldn't have told me this was possible. But what happened was, my son was born to Kundalini mantras on an operating table. I felt totally safe. I felt empowered. I felt it was extremely healing and redemptive. And, the part that really blows my mind is after he was, brought to my chest immediately after birth, no, don't pass go, don't collect $200, directly onto my chest. And we had this beautiful bonding experience. The doctor told me that I had a condition called placenta accreta. Now, if I had tried to do what's called a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean, or God forbid I had tried to do another home birth, the odds of me hemorrhaging and not surviving that are really good. They're very high.
Yeah.
And so it was just, this experience has been so transformative for me, like 180 degrees change, and I just want people to know that we don't need to fear any particular methodology. We just need to appreciate that there's beauty in all aspects on the continuum, and there's really messed up stuff going on too in all aspects of the continuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be fooled. For real.
I want to thank Celia and Teresa for listening and for sharing. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to build on what you said, but I am going to give the phone number in case anybody does want to call in. One more time, 516-945-9099. Bobby will be so proud of me. I actually gave it more than once tonight. But what I do want to talk about that you again had brought up in our private discussion is this idea of competition. What we what we are seeing, I think, in the country in general, is an us against them mentality, which is, like I've told you just politically, why I am so opposed to a two-party system, because it's great for keeping people in power who want to be in power. It's not so great for giving power back to the people, because if you can set up this us against them mentality, then we're never going to agree. We're just going to fear each other. And that, I feel, is what's happening in the women's movement. And you're an example. What happened to you is that example of where that kind of competition, oh, I had my baby better than you had your baby, or I'm a better mom because I hold my baby all the time. I'm like, and that's that lower, for lack of a better term, that is that lower male energy. It's not that male warrior upper energy. That's not that protector energy. It's not that provider energy that we talked about last week on this show. But it is that lower level of competition, and that, what they used to talk about in the 50s was, competing with the Joneses next door. And we've taken it in this country now to a whole new level. It's invaded everything we do.
Right.
And for it to be so prevalent in the women's movement, that and I've written about this myself and talked about it before, that we have, it seems to me that there are a lot of these people that allegedly represent us in this new feminism that are mean girls. They're like the mean girls.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Hello there.
Hello there.
Celia, is that you?
That is me.
Hi,
How are
Celia.
you?
I am great. Welcome to Morgan and my show here.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi, Morgan.
Hey, Azalea.
First, let me say I'm very sorry for you. And I think it's very great for you to share your story, because there are a lot of other people that go through this and, are hesitant to share for, various reasons, one of which is what you talk about, and, being ostracized. And, I think a lot of people don't know what to say, so they say nothing, and then they avoid you and the situation because they don't want to, know what to say. But I wanted to talk about what you guys were just talking about, and how I think a lot of the problem in this world, I'm a parenting coach, and I'm also a teacher of parents and kids, and I'm around a lot of parents, and I listen to them, and they ask me questions, and I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I think a lot of it is too that, so many people are so strongly opinionated that it's, my way or the highway. Mm-hmm. I just did something recently on nursing and breastfeeding and new mothers. I did a broadcast about new mothers. And, one of the things I mentioned about nursing is that, yes, nursing is the best thing for you. However, if it's causing you undue stress, if you're having difficulty with it, whatever, if you can't deal with the feeling of, just being all on your own and that whole seclusion that comes with it, because, it's kind of it's all on you, that, you can use a bottle and you can use formula, and there are millions of perfectly healthy humans in the world roaming around that were bottle fed.
Right, exactly.
Using the formula. And, and not to feel, not to have that stigma, not to feel like, oh, I'm less of a person, because honestly, the stress you incur by something that you're doing because you're trying to do the right thing, quote unquote,
right,
is equally as harmful to your child, because that stress is felt by them and passed on to them. So, I just wanted to say that, these people that feel like you have to do this way, or you are harming your child, not so. and you have to do what's right for you. And people need to start recognizing that we're all human and we're all individuals, and we need to do what's right for ourselves.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That was the point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Great one. Thank you. Thanks, Seal.
You're welcome. Go along with your conversations. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, like I was one of those people too that would have probably. I mean, I've never done it, but I can imagine I would have judged women for deciding, unless it was medically necessary, to pick up formula and use it. But like I had a situation with Phoenix where. I have an autoimmune disorder, and so I could not literally hold him to breastfeed him. So I did start using formula. And so, my expectations of this whole ideal, were again dashed away. And I ended up doing exactly what I thought I'd never be doing. But now it's just been a beautiful experience of like humbling myself and just getting a reality check
Yes.
from the universe that, I'm such a powerful person and my voice doesn't need to be used against my sisters in judgment. No aspect of this and this movement to do, all of these things a certain way. We have to take the time and recognize how destructive that is. Like we already have to deal with so much in this world.
Yeah.
Why are we putting more stuff on top of that? I mean, it's just unacceptable. It's got to stop because it's
Exactly.
just it's not cool.
It's not cool at all.
Least, it ain't cool.
Right. And at the very least, it's this nonsense of the one size fits all everything.
Yes.
It's education. It's in everything where somebody just likes standing up there and telling you that they're right and you're wrong.
Right.
And that makes them feel powerful. And it makes them feel like they're in charge and in control. And newsflash, when you're working with that level of energy, it's going to fall apart on you eventually because
Right.
eventually somebody bigger and tougher and stronger is going to come along and then they're going to be telling you what to do. So the idea is to get away from that whole way of dealing with each other.
Yes. And like, really important, check yourself before you wreck yourself because we started having a breastfeeding movement. We started having a movement to empower women in birth because we weren't liking how we were being treated and because people were like, all these financial incentives to get our babies on formula. But we can't push so far back from that we become it.
Right.
It's like the pendulum has swung too far. We have to always be checking ourselves. How can the patriarchy that we have been, trying to protect ourselves from, how can that actually become part of this new movement? Like it
Yes.
is insidious. It will find its way in if we are not conscious and we're always thinking and checking ourselves.
It's exactly what we have to do. And that is why we talk about this as a program, as a movement, the Women's Oneness Project, to get people to listen, to be heard, and to understand. You can't just block off. If you're blocking off what another woman is saying about her personal experience, then you are doing that out of fear. And it's like you said, you have to check in with yourself. What is it you're afraid of that I
Right.
can't listen to your truth?
Yep.
Are you afraid of financial loss? Are you afraid of you losing your status? Are you afraid of some imagined thing in your mind that you should be dealing with? When you sit with Native elders, they always talk about the idea of what you're talking about, checking in. You have to do that inner healing. You have to continually do that inner work and look at yourself in relationship to the community.
Yes.
So is what you are doing in relationship to the community benefiting you as well as raising the level for everybody? And if you're not checking in with yourself doing that, then I'm sorry, you're selfish.
Yeah, it's like we shouldn't have to keep recreating the wheel too with all
Yes.
these different movements. I mean, any movement worth anything is going to be self-critiquing and always introspective. I mean, why do we have to keep going over and over and watching the mistakes in every movement? It always ends with people getting on their high horse and not getting grounded and being, able to handle some critique.
Exactly.
It's
Well,
amazing.
And part of the problem is the way that we are educating children, the way that we are educating young people, and the fact that we are not allowing everyone's voice to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean, you can say this to kids. I say it to kids every day. You don't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with you. But I do have to respect you enough as one human being to another to just listen to you. To just listen to what it is you have to say. And then if I respect you, when it's my turn to speak, you'll respect me. And then what we really are going to find is that we have common ground. And the common ground for women is other women being raised up, getting human rights, and our children. And what are we doing for the next 7 generations? So we can't make everything constantly black and white.
Right.
Constantly male or female.
Yes.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's just not that
Oppressor
way.
and oppressed. I mean, yeah, I've had to learn that the hard way because
And it's very honest of you to say that.
Yeah, and I live now in the middle ground, and a lot of sisters are there with me in the depths where this dichotomy that we've created of out-of-hospital birth versus hospital birth.
Right.
It does not serve women, and it definitely does not serve children.
Right.
Our babies are not being served by perpetuating this dichotomy. I live in the canyon, the deep abyss in between these two polarities.
Right.
And my story is rising like the phoenix because I am the bridge. I am the bridge to show people that not one has the answers, not one is right and not one is wrong.
Right.
There's a continuum and there's a beautiful gray area, and we're going to demand to be seen and heard. And you can't silence us. It's not, we're not scare tactics, and our stories are not fluffy and fun to listen to. But they are necessary, just like the duality of life and death.
Yep.
That's another issue that I conquer. And I work on a daily basis is my work now as a transition priestess and a death, a perinatal bereavement doula, a death midwife. I'm trying to help us remember that, we can't have one without the other.
No.
And so a lot of women are being so... they're so taken by these beautiful visions of the perfect birth, and like if I listen and I read enough hypnobirthing CDs, that I'll have this orgasmic birth, and I'm thinking to myself, birth is wilderness. Let us not forget. This is a powerful initiation experience, and it sometimes it might be really wonderful and beautiful and healing, and it doesn't promise that, though. Don't, this is the thing. Don't be confused with expectation. Just be open and be aware that nature is as much about annihilation as it is about growth. Can we hold space for that, sisters, and remember that?
Yes. And that's where we should be grateful that we are in a country, in a place where we can speak this way, where we have access to excellent medical care and excellent alternative medical care. We have so many choices. And when we stop appreciating the fact that we have these choices and we start competing instead about my choice is better than your choice, then we start to lose that idea, and once that gratitude, once that appreciation, you said it earlier, once it starts to be about, well, how much money am I making? Wait a minute, I can't have this. We can't talk about this. My business is at risk. How could you put another woman's business at risk? Women and men are capable of the same greed, the same jealousy, the same anger, the same hatefulness. We are all people. It is time to be honest, to stop judging people based on what they look like on the outside and start honoring the fact that we are individuals. This is a long road to hoe, and it is on many fronts.
Yes.
Like we have talked about, we've got to fight it on the education front. We've got to fight it on the political front. We've got to fight it in movement after movement. And it's like you said, how come we're still reinventing the wheel? Because the people in power know that they can play us. And when you've realized you can't be played, like your story, one of the most beautiful, wonderful things about your story to me is the fact that you are so honest about where you were and how this trauma transformed you to stop being so judgmental. I loved my friend Janine who sent me a great post on Facebook that I copied that said, "Non-Judgment Day is coming." And that,
I love it.
I know. And that's what we're
Please.
working for, understanding.
Yes.
We are not, all this nonsense is not going to get solved until we have understanding and until we recognize the beauty and tragedy in each other's experiences. And certainly you're going to triple that, not even triple, you're just going to exponentially make that tragedy worse if you are not letting the person who has been through it talk about it honestly.
Right, absolutely.
If you're trying
Absolutely.
to silence them.
Yeah, I mean, in so many other cultures, people who are experiencing deep grief, especially the bereavement of children, are actually held up as wisdom keepers, and
Yes.
they're referred to almost as oracles. And I'm just like looking at the what's happened in my experience, and just I've been buried. They're trying to bury me in lies, and they don't mind that my voice is suppressed. And just like what beautiful things could come and grow from this soil where I've been buried if I was just allowed to have these little pockets where I can share and have space held for me, like what you're doing today. But when we suppress that, sacred rage is very destructive for the person who's being suppressed. But
Exactly.
it can turn on everybody. It is not it's not a good look,
No, and it doesn't, and it achieves destruction in the worst way. It's not that like you talked about, that Kali kind of energy of that we have all these old forms have to be destroyed so that we can be rebirthed
Yes.
into something greater.
Yes.
But that something greater always has to do with love, understanding, and compassion.
Yes.
That something greater is not, I'm right and you're wrong, my way
Right.
or the highway. Like,
Yes. And so, for anybody who's not familiar, I named my son Kali for a very good reason. It wasn't random at all. And so check out, if you're not familiar, the goddess Kali. And she's all about annihilation and ego slaying.
Ego slaying.
But, at her heart is the most compassionate mother and the most empathetic energy that exists. Except when Kali energy is suppressed,
it turns.
it's devastating. It's devastating. And
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be like that, but there is a reckoning that's coming, and this truth telling is it's not going to be suppressed any longer.
No.
And the thing too is this, we have to create these sacred spaces. Birth work and death work, are two of the most sacred initiation processes of the human life.
Right.
And those spaces must be purged of everything that is illusory.
Yep.
There's no way that illusion is going to be able to exist in these spaces
Exactly.
anymore. And so, we have two choices. We can either make changes and humble ourselves, or we're going to face that kind of Kali energy.
Exactly.
It's the way it's going to go.
And that's what, when we talked about, Morgan and I took the same class on thanatology, on dealing with the art of dying and death counseling and all of that. And when we live in this denial of death culture, and that has so many ramifications in birth. Certainly, we don't want to talk about when what happened to you, even if it had happened in the most innocuous way, like nobody made any mistakes. It's just that sadly
Happens
this
all the time.
happens all the time, but we don't want to talk about that at all. These are the things that bring us together. This is the depth. This is the, I'm always quoting my friend Marianne Francisi. It's not nice, but it's necessary. You said it early. It's not nice.
Right.
Not everything is nice. It's one of the things that neither of us like about the love and light,
Yes.
movement. This is like everything's love, and we can only talk about love and light. Love and light is great. I love light.
Me
We
too.
all love light,
Yes.
but there's the darkness too, and you don't see the light without acknowledging the darkness. And the darkness is where your information comes from. That's where you grow lighter.
Right. I mean, no seed grows in light. It grows in the dark. Babies grow in dark places. And so we have to hold space for it. And that's the confusion. That's the forgetfulness, and that's not serving anyone. And we have to have this reclamation of our wisdom and all the ways that have been removed from us as women. We are the holders. Our bodies are literally this dark space,
Right.
from which everything is born, and we have to know ourselves better than anyone. And we've forgotten the whole half of the story.
Yeah. And because of that, we feel powerless. When you tell the story, the whole story, like Celia just had pointed out, you get people to take responsibility for themselves, personal responsibility. And that means you might have to educate yourself. But how can you educate yourself if we're only telling the illusion?
Right.
You can't, people might want, like what happened with you. You
Yes.
wanted to take responsibility. You thought you were educated, but because nobody talked to you and was honest with you about what the true risks were,
Right.
and you ended up sadly and tragically losing your son.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I'm all about. Like the midwifery model talks all about informed decision making. And I will never give up on that model, despite, my very horrendous and terrifying experiences with my particular midwives. I believe in the model itself,
Right.
because their bad conduct, shouldn't reflect on the whole. Just like
Exactly,
bad conduct in
exactly.
hospitals doesn't reflect on the entire complex. But yeah, I lost track of thought. But yes, what you said last.
Well, it was interesting when we were out in New Mexico, as we've been for the last, I can't even remember, 8-10 years, to go to the Curanderismo conference, where there are many, many women. New Mexico has, I think, one of the highest populations of practicing midwives. There is not a single woman that came to talk to the group, whether she was from Mexico or New Mexico, that didn't say, you need this strong relationship with the hospitals. Here are all the millions of things that can go wrong, even if you're in a hospital. But if you're going to choose home birth, here is
Right.
what you have to do.
Yes.
They're so blatantly honest
Right.
about it. It was so beautiful.
Wow.
And I think in part that could be because they have such a long history of it. I mean, with Curanderismo, the Mexican folk healing arts, that they've had midwives for, I don't know, thousands of years, perhaps.
yes.
So, and New Mexico itself was one of the first places, actually one of the first places where being a midwife was banned and then subsequently made legal again. But where nurse midwifery is a very big thing. But I was just so I didn't know your story at the time. So here I am thinking, well, everybody's like this. Everybody, of course,
Right.
they're very honest. Nobody was saying don't go to a hospital.
Right.
Nobody was saying anything like that at all. As a matter
Right.
of fact, what they were saying was, yes, this is beautiful. We're going to help you at home, but let me tell you right now, you're going to the hospital if you need to go, or you feel uncomfortable. Even if the woman gets scared and says to you, I want to be in a hospital at the last minute, your response is, okay, because like Celia was saying about the stress of breastfeeding is not going to help your child. It's the same. If this woman is stressed out, all of a sudden she thought she wanted to do this and she doesn't, your job is to get her to that hospital as fast as possible, not in your car, in an ambulance.
Right.
That blew my mind.
Yep. And a lot of things have blown my mind. My life has been completely devastated in so many ways. But that's what has catalyzed my movement and my activism now, to make sure that when we have a bill of sale, then the goods delivered have to mirror that bill of sale. So
Right.
if you're talking about informed consent and informed decision making, then we deserve that as women. And
Yes.
across the continuum on methodology regarding birth practices, everybody agrees that women deserve to have the facts. But, there are certain people that are withholding the facts, and we need to address that. Why are we so afraid of the facts? And if there is some kind of argument on, whether this fact is valid, we need to work on finding facts that we can all agree that, these are the facts.
Right.
That's another whole different conversation about like who's conducting the research. How are these statistics being gathered? I can tell you
Exactly.
right now that my son's death did not count as a casualty and fatality of my midwives or the natural birth obstetrician. Okay, that counted as a hospital mortality rate.
Whoa.
My emergency cesarean counts as a hospital statistic.
Right.
Okay, we need to also be addressing how data is being collected, and we have to have sophisticated enough systems to deal with nuanced data sets. So this really deserves more conversation, and there are wonderful things we can do to improve the situation. That's the good part.
Yes,
Yep.
that's exactly the good part. And we can't, Celia just brought up a beautiful point again, too. We are constantly telling people to think for themselves. You can't think for yourself unless you have all the information.
Amen.
And we live in the information age. And that's what podcasts are all about. That's why we're here.
Yes, and I'm
So
going to be
listen.
starting my own one too with Birth and Betrayal. Yeah.
Yay, you. Yay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for holding space for me today, Maddie.
Morgan, my pleasure. Really, really my pleasure. It just an important work that you're doing, and very important topic, extremely important topic to all women everywhere, and to men, to the dads who are victims of this also, who are, and I hate to use the word, but who are hurt by this. I mean,
Oh, yes.
the dads that lose their children are just as hurt as the moms
yeah.
are, and they deserve
Absolutely.
to be honored also. And
Yes,
I
thank
know
you.
you do that. I know that's true. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank my wonderful producer one more time, Bobby Lucera. And I hope you all have a wonderful, beautiful holiday, and we'll be back next Sunday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.